anniversary of the launch of the MGNREGA. This legislation was path-breaking in its scale, architecture and thrust. Its demand-based legal framework promised an open-ended budget for implementation. Unlike all other allocation-driven social sector schemes, it completes 10 years, a longer lifespan than most rural development schemes. It is an opportune moment then to answer three questions. First, has the MGNREGA worked? Second, what's happening with it today? And third, do we still need the Act? Joining us now to take that conversation forward is Nikhil Dey, one of the biggest supporters of the NREGS. Mr. Dey, appreciate you joining us. You know, I'm holding up full-page advertisements that have been put up by the government outlining the highlights of what this government has done with the NREGS. It's ironic because this government had held out the NREGS as a symbol of the UPA's failure to address problems in the rural sector. But that's politics. So politics aside, this should be good news that the government is now trying to take ownership of the NREGS.
Yeah, it's certainly very good news that finally this battle, when the NREGA was passed, it was passed absolutely unanimously in both houses of parliament. And we've in between been stuck in this strange binary of Congress and BJP, other parties, whereas it's time that the NREGS, because of how seminal the kind of program is and has been to changing the face of rural India, that it be seen as a national program, something that everyone needs to contribute to, something that people need to stop having the kinds of arguments that were reflected in Mr. Narendra Modi's statement about it being held up as a monument to failure, and people start working to really properly put it into place and then think of improvements and see where things are not working and where they are, to strengthen those that are working and to change those that are not. So today I think marks a day after a long time when one can say that all parties are in agreement that NREGA has made a fundamental difference. All parties are in agreement that it is something that affects all people. And now the full page ads that the government is taking out, good idea, certainly to be welcomed, but we need to evaluate the government on how it is in real terms making a difference. One very, very big question is that this is a program that is dependent on open budget. Today, there is huge demand, and that's what the government is celebrating, the demand across the country, and a turnaround from a terrible situation a year ago. That demand is not being met, actually, by the government. The demand for funds, 14 states have a negative balance today. Mr. Jaitley, in his budget, promised 5,000 crores. Actually, he should have promised whatever may be demanded. But even that 5,000 crores has not been provided. Only 2 out of the 5,000 have been released. And therefore, there is a crisis, even as the celebration is taking place. So I think if the government were to at least say that, okay, today, if Mr. Jaitley had said, I am releasing the 5, whatever more will be needed in the remaining 2 months we'll give, and now let's get down to brass tacks to making sure that all the other things that need to work, that would have been great.
Okay, you know, this government does have fiscal constraints like the previous government, but just a quote from the achievements that this government has highlighted, it says the highest expenditure on the NREGS has been recorded by the government in 2015-16 so far compared to the last 5 years, and you're saying even that isn't enough and the full quantum of what was promised or allocated in the budget has not been passed on. This matter is now also in the Supreme Court, courtesy a PIL that's been filed by Aruna Roy on the government not being able to take forward the notification that was passed in February of 2014, claiming that the wages that were actually being given out are well below the minimum wages that have been fixed by state governments. Since we're talking about the road ahead now, what ought to be done at this stage?
So there are two things. The first question itself, that the claim of the government that this is the highest in 5 years, that's true, but 2009-10, the expenditure was 39,400 odd crores. If you were to just index that to inflation, the NREGS budget today in real terms should be around 62,000 crores. In place of that, we are still not at 39,000 crores. We allocated 34,000 crores and another 2,000 crores was released. So the first most important thing that's there in that writ petition as well is that there must be absolutely meeting of the demand of NREGA. So open-ended budget must be made, and if we were to only keep to 2009 levels, then we would be at a much higher level. The second issue you brought up about wages is again very important. The NREGA is not paying, the government is not paying the minimum wage in many parts of the country. And the Minister of Rural Development in Parliament actually made a statement saying that minimum wages would be paid as per the recommendations of the Mahendra Dev Committee, a committee that was set up by the government, whereas that has not been implemented either. So 2nd February would have been a good time. It's a real irony. You cannot have government running a program and not paying minimum wages. And there are 8 or 9 states where that is not being done. So again, this would have been a very good opportunity for the government to say, we will follow the law of the land, not just in NREGA, but also in minimum wages. The third issue in that PIL was actually timely payment of wages. And timely payment of wages is again dependent. If you have 14 states without a balance, then they are either going to go ahead and not employ anyone and the whole scheme will collapse, or they will employ them and pay wages much later when next year's budget comes. So next year's budget is also crucial. Mr. Jaitley came today, he celebrated NREGA, but he needs to make sure that he makes a statement next year, firstly giving enough money, and secondly saying that we will provide whatever may be needed. That's a key necessary condition for NREGA.
All right, Mr. Dey, we'll see what the budget finally does allocate to the NREGA and what Mr. Jaitley does indeed promise in terms of support to address some of the critical issues that you talked about. We could have had this conversation continue longer, but unfortunately we're right out of time. Thank you very much for joining us and articulating the 10 years of the NREGS and the road ahead. That's it then.